Garden centers love to convince you that a healthy, thriving yard requires premium tools, name-brand fertilizers, and specialty equipment that can easily run you $50, $70, even $100 before you've planted a single seed. But gardeners who've actually taken the time to compare what's sitting on Dollar Tree's shelves against those pricier garden center staples are finding out that gap isn't nearly as wide as the marketing wants you to believe. A handful of specific items in the garden aisle have quietly built a reputation among experienced home gardeners, not because everything back there is worth grabbing, but because a select group of products perform close enough to their expensive counterparts that the extra money spent elsewhere starts to feel genuinely unnecessary. Some of these have picked up a following specifically because gardeners ran side-by-side comparisons themselves, testing germination rates, tool durability, and soil performance, rather than just assuming a higher price tag automatically means better results. What makes this particular category interesting is that gardening naturally lends itself to this kind of testing, since results show up over weeks and months in a way that's hard to fake or spin. A seed either sprouts reliably or it doesn't, and a tool either survives a full season of real use or it breaks. Today we're counting down 8 Dollar Tree garden finds that consistently outperform expectations, several of which genuinely go head-to-head with products costing 5, 10, even 20 times more. If you're the kind of gardener who likes stretching a budget without cutting corners on actual results, stick around, because a few of these might change how you shop for your yard entirely. If you find this kind of comparison useful, go ahead and hit that like button before we get started. Number 1. The seed packets. This is the one that tends to surprise people the most, mostly because seed packets feel like such a low-stakes purchase that nobody expects a meaningful quality difference in the first place. At $1.25, these seed packets consistently show germination rates that hold up well against premium seed brands running $4 to $6 a packet, with gardeners reporting sprout rates in the 70 to 85% range depending on the variety, which is genuinely competitive with what pricier brands advertise. The seed count per packet is also generous relative to the price, often enough for 2 or 3 planting seasons rather than a single use, which stretches the value even further once you factor in how many packets a typical garden actually needs. Several gardeners who've run informal side-by-side trials, planting the same vegetable variety from both a dollar packet and a premium brand packet in identical soil and light conditions, report barely noticeable differences in either germination timing or eventual yield, which is exactly the kind of real-world comparison that matters far more than packaging or brand reputation alone. The variety selection has also expanded noticeably over recent seasons, now covering a fairly wide range of common vegetables, herbs, and flowers, rather than just a handful of basic options, which makes it realistic to plan an entire garden bed using nothing but these packets. Storage life has also held up reasonably well according to gardeners who've saved unused seeds from one season to the next, with germination rates dropping off at a similar rate to what's typically expected from any seed packet once it's a year or 2 old. Some gardeners have also mentioned buying multiples of the same variety, specifically because of how inexpensive each packet is, staggering plantings a couple of weeks apart to extend a harvest window rather than having everything ready to pick all at once. The instructions printed on the back of each packet are also clear and complete, covering planting depth, spacing, and days to germination, which is exactly the kind of practical information a beginner gardener needs and one that some premium seed brands assume customers already know and skip entirely. The packaging itself, while simple, has also held up well against moisture in a garage or shed environment, keeping the seeds inside dry and viable rather than degrading quickly the way flimsier paper packets sometimes do when stored somewhere other than a climate-controlled pantry. Number 2. The Terracotta planter pots. Terracotta pots are one of those garden staples where the material itself does most of the work, and this is a case where the actual clay quality genuinely holds up. At $1 each, these terracotta pots have a solid, even wall thickness rather than the thin, easily cracked variety sometimes found at similarly low price points, and the drainage hole is properly centered and sized rather than an afterthought punched in unevenly. Gardeners who've kept them outdoors through a full season of temperature swings report minimal cracking compared to cheaper terracotta that tends to flake and split after just one freeze-thaw cycle. Compared against $8 to $12 terracotta pots sold at garden centers, The material and finish are close enough that once soil and plants fill them in, there's genuinely no visible difference from a few feet away, which makes this one of the easiest, lowest-risk swaps for anyone potting a large number of plants at once without wanting to spend a fortune doing it. The consistent sizing across multiple pots also makes it easy to create a uniform look when grouping several together, whether that's lining a porch railing or filling out a windowsill, without the noticeable size variation that sometimes shows up in cheaper mass-produced terracotta. For anyone starting seedlings indoors before transplanting outside, the smaller sizes available in this line have also proven sturdy enough to handle repeated watering without the base softening or crumbling, a common issue with lower-grade unglazed clay. The natural terracotta color also weathers gracefully over time, developing a slightly aged, mineral-streaked patina from repeated watering that many gardeners actually prefer over a pristine, uniform look, since it gives potted plants a more established, lived-in appearance faster than a brand-new glossy pot would. They're also lightweight enough to move around easily when rearranging a porch or patio setup for the season, without sacrificing the sturdiness needed to hold soil and a growing root system securely in place. The unglazed surface also allows the clay to breathe naturally, letting excess moisture evaporate through the pot walls rather than staying trapped against the roots, which is one of the genuine functional advantages terracotta has always had over plastic, and this version delivers on that benefit just as reliably as the pricier options. Number 3. The garden gloves. A good pair of garden gloves needs to do two things well: protect your hands from thorns and rough soil, and hold up to repeated washing without falling apart. And this pair manages both surprisingly well for the price. At $1.25, these gloves have a textured, rubberized palm coating that provides genuine grip on tool handles and slippery, wet plant stems, rather than the smooth, slick coating that makes cheaper gloves nearly useless once they get damp. The stitching along the fingers has held up through multiple seasons of regular gardening use, according to repeat buyers, without the seams splitting open at the fingertips, the way thinner, poorly constructed gloves often do within the first few uses. Compared against $10 to $15 gardening gloves at hardware and garden supply stores, the grip and durability track closely enough that for anyone who goes through gloves regularly due to wear and tear, or simply loses them in the yard, the way most gardeners eventually do, this is a far more sensible ongoing purchase. The elastic wristband also stays snug through repeated wear, rather than stretching out and losing its shape after a handful of washes, which is a small detail that keeps soil and debris from working their way in during hands and knees weeding sessions. Available in a couple of different sizes rather than a single one-size-fits-all option, they fit noticeably better than many budget gloves that assume every hand is the same size, which makes a real difference in dexterity when handling small seeds or delicate seedlings. They're also machine washable without the rubberized coating cracking or peeling away from the fabric, which extends their usable life considerably compared to gloves that need to be hand-washed carefully or risk falling apart. The breathable fabric on the back of the hand also helps prevent the sweaty, uncomfortable feeling that fully rubberized gloves can cause during longer gardening sessions on a hot afternoon, striking a reasonable balance between protection and comfort that isn't always easy to find at any price point. They also come packaged in pairs, rather than requiring a separate purchase for left and right, which sounds obvious, but has occasionally been an issue with other budget glove sets sold individually. Number 4. The plant fertilizer spikes. Fertilizer spikes are a convenient, mess-free way to feed potted plants and small garden beds without measuring out liquid fertilizer, and the budget version here performs closer to the name brand spikes than most people expect. At $1.25 for a multi-pack, these spikes break down at a steady, controlled rate, rather than dissolving too quickly and dumping all their nutrients at once, which is a common failure point for lower-quality fertilizer products. Gardeners who've tracked plant growth and leaf color over several weeks using these spikes report healthy, consistent results comparable to what they've seen from premium fertilizer brands, costing considerably more per spike. The nutrient ratio printed on the packaging matches standard formulations used across most fertilizer products in this category, which suggests the actual formulation isn't dramatically different from what's inside a pricier box, just priced and packaged differently for a budget retailer. The spikes are also straightforward to use even for beginner gardeners, simply pushed into moist soil near the base of a plant without needing to measure or mix anything, which removes a common point of confusion that trips up newer gardeners trying to figure out correct liquid fertilizer dilution ratios. For container plants specifically, where over-fertilizing is a real risk in a confined amount of soil, the slow, steady release of these spikes has been specifically praised by gardeners as more forgiving than liquid alternatives that are easier to accidentally overuse. The spikes have also held their shape well in storage, not crumbling or softening in a pantry or garage the way some cheaper compressed fertilizer products can when exposed to humidity over time, which means a multi-pack bought at the start of a season should still be usable by the time it's actually needed weeks or months later. They're also formulated with a general-purpose ratio suitable for a wide range of common houseplants and outdoor container plants, rather than requiring a different specialty spike for every individual plant type, which simplifies feeding a mixed collection of plants without needing to keep track of several different products. The multi-pack quantity also lasts a reasonable stretch of time for anyone with a modest number of potted plants, making it easy to keep a steady feeding schedule going through an entire growing season without needing to restock partway through. Before we get to the rest of the list, it's worth taking a moment to explain why garden products specifically tend to have such a wide gap between budget and premium pricing, since it explains a lot about why this particular aisle rewards careful comparison shopping more than most other sections of the store. A large part of what you're paying for with premium garden brands is packaging, marketing, and the assumption that gardening enthusiasts are willing to spend more for a trusted name, not necessarily a meaningful difference in the raw materials themselves. Seeds, basic fertilizer formulations, and simple clay or plastic containers are commodity products at their core, manufactured using very similar processes regardless of which brand name ends up on the label. That doesn't mean every budget garden product performs identically to its expensive counterpart. Tools with more complex mechanisms or specialty formulated products can show a real, noticeable quality gap. But for the simpler, more foundational items every gardener needs in bulk, the price difference is often far larger than the actual performance difference, which is exactly why this category rewards the kind of side-by-side testing gardeners have been doing. It's also worth pointing out that gardening as a hobby has a naturally high tolerance for experimentation built into it already. Most experienced gardeners are used to losing a few plants to weather, pests, or simple trial and error every single season, regardless of what they spend on supplies, which makes the category a genuinely low-risk place to test a cheaper alternative. If a dollar seed packet underperforms compared to expectations, the total loss is $1 and a bit of soil, not a significant financial setback, which is part of why so many gardeners have been willing to run these comparisons themselves rather than just taking a brand's word for it. That same logic doesn't necessarily apply everywhere else in a budget retailer, but it fits gardening particularly well. Number 5. The watering can. A watering can seems like about as simple a tool as exists, but the design details actually matter quite a bit once you're using one regularly, and this one gets more of those details right than its price suggests it should. At $3, this watering can has a well-balanced handle placement that doesn't strain the wrist even when it's filled completely, and the spout produces a controlled, even flow rather than the unpredictable gush or dribble that plagues cheaper plastic watering cans. The rose attachment on the spout, the perforated piece that softens the water flow for delicate seedlings, stays securely attached rather than popping off mid-use, which is a small but genuinely important detail for anyone watering young, easily disturbed plants. Compared against $10 to $15 watering cans sold at garden centers, the balance and pore control are close enough that most gardeners wouldn't notice a meaningful difference in daily use, especially once it's simply doing its job on the porch or in the garden rather than sitting on display. The plastic construction has also held up well to direct sunlight over a full outdoor season without becoming brittle or discolored, a common failure point for cheaper outdoor plasticware left exposed to UV rays for months at a time. The capacity is generous enough to cover a reasonable number of potted plants per fill, which cuts down on the number of trips back to a spigot or hose during a typical watering routine. It also stacks or nests reasonably well with itself for storage if you own more than one, and the molded plastic handle hasn't shown signs of cracking at the joint where it meets the body, which is often the first failure point on cheaper watering cans once they're filled to capacity regularly. The overall shape is also compact enough to fit comfortably on a small balcony or windowsill without taking up excessive space, making it a practical option for apartment gardeners tending to a handful of potted plants rather than a sprawling backyard setup. The neck opening is also wide enough to refill quickly from a sink or bucket without needing a funnel, which is a small convenience that saves time on days when watering the whole collection of plants means several refills back to back. Number 6. The garden hand trowel. Hand trowels take a lot of abuse, digging into compacted soil, prying out stubborn roots, and getting dropped in the dirt more often than any gardener would like to admit, which makes durability the single most important factor in this category. At $1.25, this trowel has a surprisingly rigid metal blade that hasn't bent or warped even when used on harder, rockier soil, unlike thinner stamped metal trowels that flex and eventually deform under real pressure. The handle grip stays secure rather than loosening or spinning independently of the blade after repeated use, which is usually the first point of failure on cheaper hand tools. Gardeners who've compared it directly against $15 to $20 trowels from name-brand toolmakers report similar digging performance in typical garden soil, with the pricier versions only pulling ahead noticeably when working with heavy clay or particularly rocky ground, situations most home gardeners don't regularly encounter. The blade edge has also held up to regular digging without dulling noticeably faster than pricier alternatives, and the compact size makes it easy to store in a small garden tote or hang on a pegboard without taking up much space. A few gardeners have mentioned buying several at once, specifically because the low price makes it easy to keep one in multiple locations, one by the back door, one in a garden shed, one in a car trunk, rather than constantly hunting for a single misplaced tool. The blade also holds an edge well enough for light trimming tasks in a pinch, like cutting through small roots or dividing a root-bound plant, extending its usefulness a bit beyond just straightforward digging and scooping. The overall weight is also well balanced for extended use, avoiding the wrist fatigue that comes with a poorly weighted trowel during longer sessions of transplanting or bed preparation, which matters more than people expect once a task stretches beyond a quick 5-minute job. It also cleans off easily with a quick rinse, without soil sticking stubbornly to the blade surface the way it can on some rougher finished budget tools, which keeps it ready to use again without needing a scrub between gardening sessions. Number 7. The plant labels and garden markers. This is a small, unglamorous item, but anyone who's ever lost track of which seedling is which understands why it matters. At $1.25 for a multi-pack, these plastic plant markers are rigid enough to push into soil without bending or snapping, and they resist fading in direct sunlight noticeably better than expected for something at this price, staying legible through a full growing season rather than turning into an unreadable blank stick by midsummer. Compared against garden marker sets running $6 to $10, the material thickness and UV resistance are close enough that for anyone labeling a vegetable garden or seed-starting trays, there's very little practical reason to spend more on this particular category. Writing on them with a permanent marker or grease pencil stays legible through repeated rain and watering sessions, rather than smudging or washing away within the first couple of weeks, like the ink on some cheaper markers tends to. For anyone starting a lot of seeds indoors before the growing season, where mixing up which tray is which can genuinely set a garden back, this small, inexpensive item ends up preventing a surprisingly common and frustrating mistake. The pack size is also generous enough to label an entire vegetable bed or several trays of seedlings without running out partway through, which is a small but genuinely convenient detail for anyone planting a larger variety of crops in a single season. They also come in a light, neutral color that keeps handwriting easy to read against, rather than a busy pattern or overly dark background that makes labels harder to glance at quickly while walking through a garden bed. The pointed tip pushes into soil cleanly without needing to be forced, even in slightly compacted ground, which avoids the frustration of a marker snapping or bending when trying to push it into place near an already established plant. Number 8. The potting soil. Saving the most debated item for last, this potting soil, priced at $1.25 per bag, has drawn more direct comparison testing from gardeners than almost anything else on this list, largely because soil quality has such a direct impact on whether a season of gardening actually succeeds. The texture is loose and well aerated rather than dense and compacted straight out of the bag, which matters significantly for root development, and it retains moisture at a rate that gardeners describe as comparable to premium potting mixes costing 3 to 4 times more per bag. It's worth noting that some gardeners choose to supplement it with a bit of added perlite or compost for particularly demanding plants. But for general potting and container gardening, repeated grow tests comparing plant health and root development side by side against name-brand potting mixes have shown results close enough that the price gap is difficult to justify for most everyday container gardening needs. The bag itself is also a manageable size for anyone without a lot of storage space, avoiding the bulky, heavy bags that premium potting soil often comes in, which makes it easier to carry and store for apartment or small space gardeners working with a handful of containers rather than a full in-ground garden bed. It also doesn't have the strong, off-putting odor that some cheaper soil blends carry straight out of the bag, which matters more than people expect for anyone potting plants indoors or on a small balcony where ventilation is limited. The texture stays consistent throughout the bag, rather than having compacted clumps toward the bottom, a common issue with cheaper bag soil that's been sitting on a shelf for an extended period before purchase. It also mixes well with amendments if you do choose to supplement it, blending evenly rather than clumping unevenly around added perlite or compost, which makes it a solid, adaptable base regardless of whether it's used straight out of the bag or customized further for more particular plants. That wraps up today's list of 8 Dollar Tree garden finds that genuinely go head-to-head with products costing significantly more. Gardening is one of those hobbies where costs can add up fast without anyone quite noticing. A few pots here, a bag of soil there, and it's worth remembering that a lot of the foundational items every garden needs don't actually require premium pricing to perform well, even if the marketing at bigger garden centers would have you believe otherwise. It's still worth being selective rather than assuming every single item in the garden aisle is a hidden gem, since some categories, particularly anything with more complex mechanical parts like pruning shears or hose attachments, do show a more noticeable quality gap at this price point. Simple, low-mechanism items tend to be where this store consistently performs best, while anything involving moving parts, precise mechanisms, or specialized engineering is worth a closer look before assuming the same value holds true. But for the 8 specific items on today's list, the gap between what you're paying and what you're actually getting is consistently smaller than most people expect walking in. It's also worth mentioning that stocking up on a few of these at once, particularly the seed packets and plant markers, since they're small and easy to store, is a reasonable strategy heading into a new growing season, especially since garden inventory at any store can shift or run low once planting season is in full swing and demand picks up across the board. For anyone just getting into gardening and hesitant to spend a lot of money before knowing whether it's a hobby that'll actually stick, starting with a handful of these budget-friendly basics is a genuinely sensible way to get a full season of real experience without a large upfront investment. If it turns out gardening isn't for you, the financial risk stays low, and if it does stick, as it does for most people who give it an honest try, you'll have a much better sense of exactly which categories are actually worth upgrading to a pricier version down the line. That kind of hands-on, low-stakes learning is honestly one of the more underrated benefits of starting a new hobby this way, since it lets you figure out your actual preferences and needs before committing real money to premium versions of tools or supplies you might not end up using as often as you initially expect. Which one of these are you planning to try in your own garden this season? Let us know in the comments below, and if you've found a Dollar Tree garden item that deserves a spot on a future list, share that too, since some of our best finds come directly from gardeners testing things out themselves and reporting back on how they actually performed over a full growing season. If you enjoyed this list, make sure you're subscribed, because we cover budget-friendly finds like these across every category, every single week, and we read through every comment before putting the next list together. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.